Washington Journal continues.
And we're back with Texas Republican Louie Gohmert, member of the Judiciary Committee. Thanks for being on. Appreciate it.
Great to be here.
We'll just begin with Boston bombings. Get your reaction.
Well, it was tragic, and anytime fellow Americans suffer like that, it brings the rest of the country together. I recall 9/12 so vividly. Back then I was a judge, and you know, the day after the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Centers, there were Native Americans that day. There were no Euro-Americans, African-American. Everybody was an American. And it was just such a warm time. I mean, people around squares, like in my hometown, held hands and sang together, prayed together. And there was some of that this week as the attack happened in Boston. It wasn't, as some of the Bostonians have said, this was not just on Boston. This was on America. And all of us should be outraged and doing everything we can to help them.
How should any suspect, we don't have one right now, but how should any suspect be handled in this?
Well, you know, they did have a person of interest. And if you go back historically, sometimes they were right on, and sometimes it's like a Richard Jewell. But mistakes have been made in the past, and some have said, oh, well, I guess this guy had nothing to do with it. I don't think you can make that judgment right now. But having been a prosecutor, a judge, a chief justice, and having been court appointed to handle, including appeals of death sentences, or at least one, I know that the best thing they can do is be very thorough, not skip any clues, because if they do, even if they believe they've got the right guy or persons, if they've skipped over some investigation of things that came up, those are going to come up at the trial. They'll be used to raise reasonable doubts. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you check on that? And that's the last thing they want. They want to be very thorough, and I've been very impressed with how they've been going about the investigation. They don't want to find out that somebody had the perfect video or snapshot down the road. They're asking for those things now. I think they're doing a very good job, but don't jump to any conclusions for or against anybody they had picked up and were initially suspected.
Well, you sound skeptical then that reports are today that the FBI has cleared the Saudi national, that he's no longer a person of interest. You sound skeptical.
Well, I just think we should be in a wait-and-see mode.
Why don't you believe the FBI when they say they've cleared him?
Well, they said that Richard Jewell was the person of interest. I just think that it's too early to completely exonerate anybody, and especially someone who is reported to have said the things he did. I think it's just we need to be in a wait-and-see mode. They need to be very thorough, and I think it will inure. Whether it is or is not this Saudi that was involved, say hypothetically that he may have been involved, it looks so much better, and it is so much better, if they get down the road and they say, look, you know, we didn't just concentrate on this person. We wanted to make sure that we looked at all the possibilities. And so I think what they're doing is the appropriate way to approach it. Don't fail to pursue any clues, and some of them may lead back to this guy, maybe they don't, but keep an open mind, pursue every clue, and we'll see where it leads.
Senator Saxby Chambliss, after a briefing with intelligence officials, was quoted in the paper as saying today that it's starting to, I'm paraphrasing here, it's starting to look like a domestic terrorist act. What do you make of that? He didn't point to any specific evidence, and officials haven't either, but what do you make of that?
Well, I think that that tells you, Saxby is an honest guy, it tells you that what was presented to Saxby made him think it may be a domestic situation, but we need to wait and see.
What does that mean for prosecuting and any sort of domestic versus a foreign terrorist attack?
Well, if it ends up being an American citizen that was involved, whether it's a member of Al-Qaeda, whether it's a lone wolf, whether it's an individually radicalized person, whether it's some liberal nutcase like the Unabomber, or somebody more conservative like at Oklahoma City, it just means they need to be thorough. And if it, well, regardless, since it was on American soil, it normally kicks in Article 3 court situations. And I don't believe Massachusetts has the death penalty. We have a death penalty under federal law. I've heard on television many Bostonians say, you know, we want this person or persons to get the death penalty. But I also would encourage people not to jump the gun on that. As a judge who has had to listen to arguments on whether or not to change venue, if people all over the community are saying we want this defendant or defendants to get the death penalty, then the chance they're raising the risk that the case will have to be moved to somewhere else where it's not been prejudged. So I think right now we need to be the public at large concentrating on doing everything we can for the people in Boston, the victims' families. But then in the meantime, law enforcement, Homeland Security really need to be following every clue they've got.
Louie Gohmert, a Republican of Texas, sits on the Judiciary Committee. He's also the vice chair of the Crime, Terrorism, Homeland Security, and Investigations Subcommittee. You touched on it, your experience as a judge. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Well,
I've had thousands of cases come through my court, all felony cases up to and including death penalty cases. As I mentioned, I was appointed to appeal a death penalty, and as I told the highest court in Texas, I believe in the death penalty. I think it's appropriate in some cases, but before it's implemented, we have to make absolutely certain that all the procedural safeguards have been followed, and in the case I handled, they were not, and I was effective in getting it reversed.
Let's talk about immigration. The Gang of Eight in the Senate have put forth a proposal. There's a Gang of Eight in the House, of course, as well, working on this. What do you make so far of what you've heard about the Gang of Eight and the Senate Gang of Eight proposal?
And I've got good friends on the House Gang of Eight and also in the Senate Gang of Eight, and I know that they mean well. But Greta, when the President of the United States, and I've got the outline here of what they proposed, but the big trigger is when the President gets around to finally securing the border and having 90% or higher capacity of actually having secured the border, then it triggers other things. But the problem is, you look at what they're offering, they're saying we're going to give legal status here. And it talks about we're going to construct fences, we're going to do these things. We're going to be doing a lot of things we should do, but they are going to register people that came here illegally, and it'll give them a legal status. And then after the border is supposedly secured, then they'll take further steps toward further legal status. The problem is, this has been promised since 1986. I never met Ronald Reagan. I really liked him, but he dropped the ball on securing the border. He made sure we had the amnesty that was promised, just like in this, it's legal status, which is a bit of amnesty, whatever you call it. But the President should not be in a position of saying, you give me all of this immigration reform, give me basically amnesty for all these people, millions that are here that came illegally, and then I'll get around to truly securing the border. He took an oath. He has an obligation to secure the border. And what I first thought after my thoughts and prayers went for the victims and the families in Boston is, my gosh, we've seen this in Israel. And after Israel had to suffer the slings and arrows and deaths and the maimings for so long. I've been in the coffee shops over there. Oh, this was a coffee shop where a bomber killed a bunch of people. Oh, this is a park bench area where people were killed. That's where that bus blew up that killed a bunch of people. This is where the playground was, where a radical Islamist walked from his apartment over to this playground, blew himself up, and killed these kids. Finally, the Israeli people said, you know what? Enough. They built over 70% of it is just a fence, and the rest is a wall. prevent snipers from knocking off their kids, and they finally stopped the domestic violence from people that wanted to destroy them. And I'm concerned we need to do that as well.
Steve King, Republican from Iowa, made similar comments yesterday, tying immigration reform to what happened in Boston.
It remains to be seen whether it's domestic or foreign, but these kind of things always or generally trigger copycat things and put that thought in other people's mind, often domestic, even if it was foreign. But we have got to make sure that people are here legally. And if you look at the 9/11 bombers, hijackers, most of them came on visas legally, and then the visas. 40% of the people in this country came legally, and then we just do nothing when they overstay their visas.
How do you respond to people who say you're making political hay out of the situation in Boston?
I say, look, I don't question those people's motives that say that, but you've got to understand our hearts. We want America to continue to be a haven for people who just want to live free. And unfortunately, when you have the greatest country, the greatest liberties, you're going to draw people that will want to destroy you.
Are you saying, though, that immigrants, most of the immigrants, majority of the immigrants, are people coming in here to harm America?
Oh, gosh, no.
Okay.
No. And in fact, E Pluribus Unum was part of the Great Seal, just as the pyramid, the all-seeing eye of God, the He God has smiled on our undertaking, all part of the original Great Seal back from the 1700s. But out of many, one was one of our strengths, being a melting pot, where people come from all over. It has helped make us the greatest country in the world. We need immigration. We want immigration. But it is also my office. I help people who want to bring family in legally, be they Hispanic or African or Asian or wherever. But we try to help them legally. And I have people that say it took me 10 years. Now it looks like I should have just blown it all off and come in illegally, because then I would have been legalized. But we owe it to the immigrants that have come in legally to make sure they're safe as well. We know Al-Qaeda has camps over with the drug cartels on the other side of the Mexican border. We know that people are now being trained to come in and act like Hispanic when they're radical Islamists. We know these things are happening, and it's just insane not to protect ourselves and make sure that people come in, and as most people do, that the freedoms we have.
Wall Street Journal editorial, the immigration windfall, in support of comprehensive immigration reform.
And the Chamber of Commerce is too. They like the cheap labor.
Quoting Douglas Holtz-Aiken, though, they talk about the windfall for the economy overall.
And Doug is a friend, and he's a brilliant guy. I'm not sure if he was hired to help them come to this conclusion or to make the case for them.
Just listen to what he had to say in the Wall Street Journal. A benchmark immigration reform, by which he means more visas to productive workers, would raise the pace of economic growth by nearly a percentage point over the near term and raise GDP per capita by over $1,500, he says.
Yeah, and with all due respect to Doug, I just think he is wrong. When you look at other projections of just how much it's going to cost, and I know that this administration, the same ones that said if you like your insurance, you can keep it, you like your doctor, you can keep it, that Obamacare won't include abortion, that illegal immigrants will not get care under, all of those things turned out to be not true. Well, it's the same thing with this. There are a lot of promises. They will not be met because it is going to cost America dearly if we legalize people that came in illegally.
Let's keep viewers involved. Lori's been waiting in California. Republican caller on the air with Congressman Louie Gohmert. Go ahead.
Representative Gohmert?
Yes.
Hi, sir. I just wanted to tell you, you have quickly become my most favorite representative. As a matter of fact,
so you're the one. Thank you very much.
As a matter of fact, I'm a truck driver, and I just drove through your town.
Really?
Yeah.
East Texas, huh?
I'm sorry?
You were in East Texas.
Yeah, Marshall.
Awesome.
I saw the sign for your office. But anyways, I have 2 points, if you'll allow me.
Okay, sure.
Regarding the immigration, I agree with you 100%. I live in California. I've seen what it's done to our town. I find it highly insulting that the government is trying to sell us, and has sold a lot, I admit, on the fact that we need more workers when we have, 20 million plus out of work?
Right.
So we're going to bring in workers and pay Americans not to work. I find that highly insulting, and you're absolutely right. These people, bless their hearts, I understand they're coming for a better life, but what is that going to do to our welfare system? They're going to automatically be eligible, and I know the government says they're not, but we all know they will.
They have been right now, yeah. They are right now.
Absolutely. So
there are people that get paid to sign them up for food stamps and to get them on federal programs. We have those kind of crazy programs out there.
Well, under the proposal by the Gang of Eight, though, these people, if they get into the system, would not be eligible for federal benefits.
Right. And
while they're waiting, which could take 10 to 13 years.
That is what has been said. Greta, the law right now is they are not allowed to get the welfare, the different programs they're getting, yet we're doing it anyway, and this administration has led the way in signing up more people that came illegally that are not lawfully eligible for these programs, and they're signing them up anyway. What I would like to see more than anything from this administration is a good faith effort to follow the law and enforce the law as it is, because until that's done, just changing the law is not going to do anything.
All right, Lydia, Upper Marlboro, Maryland, Democratic caller.
Well, Representative Gohmert, you are not one of my favorite representatives. Let me get that up. And so I'm sitting here. You're here in Washington, D.C. You don't know any more about what's going on in Boston than I do. Now, the FBI have said, along with the Boston Police Commissioner, said this young student that went to the hospital to be treated for burns, he has been totally eliminated. They interviewed in the hospital. They went and searched his apartment. Yet you are sitting here making these little snide comments about his suspicious activity. What suspicious activity did he do except to go to be treated for his burns?
All right, Congressman.
Okay, and thank you, Lydia. And with deference to your comments, obviously you don't know who I've talked to. And so you're being a little judgmental, actually, without having all the facts about who I've talked to and what I know. But I will continue to insist that what I know from the experience of being involved in thousands of felony cases is you don't ever completely rule out anything until all the evidence is in. And I think it is a responsible thing to do, not to say right now we have the person. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And you're misunderstanding. I'm not saying this is the person that did it. I'm saying the proper approach is to wait to jump to any conclusions, whether it is or isn't, there is or isn't any involvement from the Saudi student is something that judgment needs to be reserved on. That's all I'm saying.
Who have you been talking to? What sort of information have you been given?
I have a lot of people that give me information because they know that I will trust, they can trust me, and they've seen that even if there's some left-wing person on CNN screaming at me, just give a name, I will not give up sources. I will not give up information that will cause people.
Sources in the FBI?
I'm not going to give sources. I'm just mainly going on my experience when I say just wait for any rush to judgment for or against anyone, not just this Saudi student.
The caller brings up how members of Congress get information. Are you getting briefed? Will you get briefed again this week?
Greta, my experience with this administration is that when I have gone to classified briefings by this administration, I walk out with everybody else saying, this is a waste of time. I found out more than that on C-SPAN or on the internet, or talking to people that were involved and know what's happening. So anyway, I have not been a fan of this administration's briefings. I don't find out as much as I find out from other sources from this administration.
All right. Sherry in Portsmouth, Virginia, Republican caller. Hi, Sherry.
Hi, how are you?
I think okay, Sherry.
Go ahead, Sherry.
I speak to from founding of this country, and I would love to see our current representatives and senators be able to live up to the vision and the principles of this nation. In 1776, we had a great experiment of democracy launched, and it was quite exciting. It had to be reaffirmed in 1865, and they preserved it in the 1930s after the Great Depression, and now we're at a tipping point, and we need men and women with visions and courage to be able to lead this country, and I don't see that happening. And when in 1776, it didn't happen that way either, because what happened then is that only men who own property were allowed to vote. So it's our country has been built on great vision, but it takes us here on the ground to actually recognize those visions. Because of what was done in 1776 and then with the Constitution in terms of preserving slavery, that is what led to the Civil War.
Okay, sure, I'll leave it there and have the Congressman respond.
Yeah, and great point, Sherry, and I couldn't agree more with you. Some say that about a third of the people supported the revolution, about a third were against it, were considered Tories, and about a third played both sides. And it is one of the great ironies that a guy as brilliant as Thomas Jefferson could write the Declaration of Independence, include a provision in there condemning King George for ever allowing slavery to take place, and yet he has this blind spot because he continued to have slavery. So you're exactly right. Then the Constitution, to actually mean what it said, took a civil war, and as Lincoln said, it's inscribed at the Lincoln Memorial on the inside wall, you know, that if it be God's will that every drop of blood drawn by the master's lash be drawn by the sword, then we still must conclude, as was 3,000 years ago, that the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. We need to constantly work to improve this little experiment in democracy. As Ben Franklin said, you have a republic, madam, if you can keep it. And some people, especially whites, Anglos, have mistakenly thought that Martin Luther King Jr. Merely helped African Americans, minorities in America. Actually, he freed up a little white boy like me, who is a Christian, to treat brothers and sisters as brothers and sisters. He did a great thing for all America. And so it took that kind of vision, just as Sherry pointed out, the Revolution, the Civil War, actually the World Wars, especially World War II, and then on up through the Civil Rights Movement to get more where we should be. But when she says she wants people of courage, I can tell you personally, my skin has gotten much, much thicker, but it still hurts a little bit when people that didn't have my scores to get in school call me moron and all these ridiculous names and load up the front end of the internet with the most ridiculous allegations, things that were not even true at all. So I don't know if that's not necessarily courage, not the kind that the great heroes of America had, but it is a confidence in knowing who I am and whose I am and where this country needs to be if it's going to continue for another 100 years.
Dolores in Billerica, Massachusetts.
Dolores?
Independent caller. Hi, Dolores.
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning.
My question is regarding immigration. It seems like our immigration problems, once people come here illegally, they not only get the benefits, and I understand why they're coming to benefit their families, but some of them are coming to destroy America as we once knew it. Our traditions, our religions, whatever, because they're not just coming from Mexico, they're coming from all over the world.
That's right. Yeah, and thank you, Dolores. You're exactly right. And some people we know have, and thank God that the vast majority of people immigrating into America, they just want the freedoms and opportunities that our Constitution guarantees. And I'm very grateful for that. It breaks my heart, though, that we have laws in place that some people come in and they come for jobs to help their families, and then we have people working for the government come to them and say, here, let us give you some welfare. Well, I've heard of these situations firsthand. You know, well, we're not eligible. No, it's fine. Just sign up. Go ahead. There were people that were told, oh, it's okay to sign up for a voter registration card even though you're here illegally, because the Attorney General has sued Texas and will not be enforcing, they won't be able to force the voter ID, so you can go ahead and vote too. So those are problems. People come with the right motivation and then they get lured into things that were not part of their nature.
What about the border security provisions in the Gang of Eight, the Senate's Gang of Eight plan? The Wall Street Journal, $17 billion total for the price tag of their legislation. Most of that estimated $17 billion cost will go toward new immigration enforcement measures. According to an aide, the legislation calls for at least $4.5 billion for a border security plan, mandatory use of the federal E-Verify system by all employers, and a new system to track people with U.S. visas as they exit the country. Is this enough? Is that adequate?
Those are a fantastic start, and that's what we ought to be doing. They're exactly right. And Greta, I'm telling you, if this administration will just do their job and secure our borders, not close them, we need immigration to continue legally, but just do their job, then we will have an agreement like that. We can work this issue out. But what we've already heard from Border Patrol is that just talking about legalization of people here illegally has caused a mass influx. 3 times many are reporting to start coming in. We have the anecdotal situations of people saying, well, you're arresting me, but Obama's going to let me go, or where do I go to get amnesty? But we also have the human tragedy because of the magnet that this kind of talk of legalization has caused. People are dying in greater numbers than ever, coming across desert areas, brush areas of Texas, and it's going to get worse if we don't first secure the border. Do that. Those are good ideas in there, very good ideas. Let's do them. And one other thing, most people are not aware, I was not until my friend Zoe Lofgren, good liberal Democrat from California, but Zoe said in one of our hearings that the largest number of prosecutions are coming for people who are deported and re-enter illegally, and I couldn't believe that. And so I ran the numbers, and sure enough, it's 34.9% of the prosecutions by this administration or against people who deported, come back illegally. You think about the billions of dollars that will be saved if they just put it on securing the border and making sure people come in legally.
I want to know from Sarah Murray's story in the in the Wall Street Journal that the cost of this, the $17 billion estimated cost, lawmakers say fines and fees could cover that total. Tom, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Democratic caller. Go ahead.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah, my good morning, guests, and I mean, no offense. You know what I mean? This is what's great about America.
Yeah.
My daughter, little 100-pound, 5 foot some, gonna get ready to take a test because she's gonna have the legal right to operate a 2-ton vehicle that could kill. Right? It's a car.
Yeah.
And she's gonna go to one of our state police, whom we love and we respect, and she's gonna go and she's gonna take her test, a policeman, and then he's gonna say okay, and then she's gonna register. Okay, she's gonna register at PennDOT. All right. We do that with a car. I can't understand why we can't do that with guns. I don't understand how we could sit there. We can't even get a background check at these farm shows or whatever, these gun shows in which there's people there I wouldn't let babysit my dog, and we're sitting there and we're saying, oh, here, take a gun.
Yeah,
right.
Tom, what was the last gun show you went to and tried to buy guns?
Sorry, I didn't realize you wanted to talk back to him.
Well, all right, and Tom makes a good point. He's making sense. However, it's been clearly established that when the president and others have talked about this 40% getting their guns without the background checks, it is simply not true. people at gun shows that are registered firearms salesmen, they have to make sure that the background check is run. It's a tiny percentage that doesn't. And by the way, in Texas, you don't even have to go to the state trooper and have the driving test anymore. I thought it was a good idea. But anyway, the concern that people have is, are we developing a national registry for guns? And there needs to be a safeguard that that's not what's being developed. But when it comes to the horrible, just evil that was perpetrated on these precious innocent children at Sandy Hook, and legislation that people are holding Sandy Hook up and saying we demand that these be done for the sake of these children and those heroic teachers and administrators, there ought to be one question on any legislation that's proposed in this building. Would it have made a difference at Sandy Hook? Would it have made a difference in Colorado? Because if they're proposing legislation in the name of these fallen victims, then it should have prevented what happened. And the people proposing the legislation right now admit this would not have changed anything at Sandy Hook.
The Senate compromise on background checks includes sales on the Internet. The New York Times writes this morning, that Armlist and similar websites function as unregulated stores where the essential anonymity of the Internet allows unlicensed sellers to advertise scores of weapons and people legally barred from gun ownership to buy them. It goes on to say this. Gun control advocates argue that such checks might have prevented shootings like that of Zena Houghton, 42, who was killed in October with 2 other women by her husband, Radcliffe, even though a restraining order barred him from having guns.
Yeah, and that's not Sandy Hook. And the legislation being proposed is to prevent Sandy Hook, and then they say this would not prevent it. We don't need people with mental
So it has to prevent mass killings, not just...
What I'm saying is it's disingenuous to say we must do this in the name of the fallen, the dead at Sandy Hook, and what you propose would not change one iota of what happened there. That is the problem. And with regard to this one incident, I have to look into it. I'm not familiar with that situation. But what I can tell you is that it is the huge percentage of people who buy guns have the background checks, even at the gun shows, as they're talking about. If they're federally licensed firearms salespeople, even like the Fast and Furious, those gun sellers did not want to sell guns to the people that the ATF, the Federal Justice Department, demanded that they sell to. They didn't want, because it's they could lose their license if they sell to somebody who is not supposed to have a firearm. They're very careful about that. The online sales are something we ought to look at, and I would imagine that I haven't had anybody offer a bill that dealt with the online purchases. I bet we could reach an agreement on that very quickly. That is a good issue and a good point.
Yeah, and by the way, the New York Times front page piece is about online sales. The New York Times bought a gun, tried to buy a gun, and went forth with a purchase to try to test the system. So front page of the New York Times. Cliff in Lebanon, Maine, Republican caller. Go ahead, Cliff.
Hi, Cliff.
Well, how are you doing today? I hope everything's going well. It's a beautiful day and sunny here in Lebanon, Maine. I've got a few comments about basically immigration. I'll start with that. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay, our government doesn't seem to want to enforce any of the immigration laws we have now. There's a lot of federal laws in place. These people are felons the minute they cross the border, and they don't seem to understand that.
That's right.
I see signs where they're protesting, and they say, we don't want to be second-class citizens. That's the problem. They are not citizens. They're felons. If we give them amnesty or a path to citizenship, are we going to do this for every felon in the country? Why not?
Congressman?
Well, it's an excellent question, Cliff. The problem with some of the things that are being proposed and that are being carried out, just very basic common sense, even in Washington, you don't reward inappropriate conduct and it incentivizes inappropriate conduct, and you don't punish lawful moral conduct. And too often that's what we've been doing. We penalize the people that are wanting to do it properly. And as far as immigration reform, Greta, we desperately need immigration reform. It is outrageous that in the most sophisticated country in the world, that third world countries do a better job than we do in processing visa requests. That ought to be a 90-day done. Either you come in or you don't. But that's not what happens. You shouldn't have to pay several $1,000s, as many Hispanic friends I know that immigrated did, to try to get somebody to help them, because they shouldn't have to pay a dime. They ought to be able to fill it out by themselves and make application and come in. We ought to be doing that. Those reforms need to happen.
All right. Well, let's go to Michael in Prescott, Arizona, independent caller.
Yeah, hi. Representative Gohmert, it's a pleasure to talk to you, and you are my favorite representative.
Thanks, Michael.
I love when you. I wait for you every evening to have your speeches on the floor and talk about the way
a bit masochistic, it sounds like.
The country was, founded by Christians, and I love your talks. I wait for you every evening. Anyway, since you're on the Judiciary Committee, how in the world is Eric Holder still on there? He's the biggest straw purchaser there is.
Right.
And as far as him doing that thing with the civil rights and the Black Panthers in Philadelphia, I from that day on, that man was no good in my books. So I think Bin Laden has won as far as I'm concerned. He's taken our rights away. I mean, the Patriot Act. Give me back my rights, please, and just start following the Constitution.
All right, several issues there for you to respond to, Congressman.
Well, thanks, Michael, and thank you, Greta. But very good points. When it came to Fast and Furious, I am still just completely aghast that the Justice Department would not demand answers. When Eric Holder came before us and said, we don't know what happened, if I'm head of the Justice Department and somebody in my department made gun sellers sell to people they knew were going to go to drug cartel, to criminal hands, I would be outraged, and I would not stop until I found out the moron, the crazy person that did that.
Should he step down? The Attorney General?
Yes, he should have, and this is, to me, this is not a partisan issue. Some have said it's never smart to go after an Attorney General or the FBI Director. But back after we found out that the Justice Department, when Bush was president, had under the FBI, under Robert Mueller, a great American, a great patriot, but under him, there were potentially thousands of abuses of FBI agents just writing letters, national security letters, on fishing expeditions. I think the FBI director under Bush should have stepped down. He shouldn't even been there when Obama came in. That was so egregious. But also with Eric Holder, I mean, I have asked him in the hearing for the documentation that his Justice Department gave to what the people that supported financially terrorism. Please give them to Congress. We would like to see those documents. And he says he didn't think that he could do that, or he'll have to look. They gave them to terrorists, and they can't give them to members of Congress. I think it's an outrage, and actually, Michael brings up the point, but as I speak, we're moving forward with subpoena to get documents that Eric Holder would not furnish.
All right. Well, we're running out of time, but I want to get in this last phone call here for you. Sure. Gary in Fall River, Massachusetts, Democratic caller. Gary, can you make it quick?
Yes. First of all, I'm a radio host of Troy C. Radio in Fall River. I got some quick questions.
Sure, Gary.
First of all, the United States is supposed to be a Christian country. Now, why are we funding wars but not feeding our own people? Why are we taking care of Americans in funding wars? We can afford to do that, but we can't afford to put money in Social Security. And You know, and there's a lot of things going on. You know, and
well, Gary, we'll take that point about a Christian country funding wars, not feeding people.
And the president says, you know, we're not a Christian country right now, and I'm not going to debate that with him. But I know that of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, over a third of them were actually ordained Christian ministers. So there was a Judeo-Christian belief system among most of the people who were founders, not all. Some were deists, but not all that are being taught now are deists. Like Washington was not a deist. Ben Franklin said, I've lived so a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth. God governs in the affairs of man. That's not a deist. But anyway, but Gary makes a very good point. For example, I've had a bill in each Congress that simply says any country, you know, they're sovereign, but any country that votes against the U.S. position more than half the time should not get a dime of any assistance. And here we're sending money to Egypt. They're going after Coptic Christians. They're going after Jews. They're going after moderate Muslims. I've had in DFW airport, different places, people come up to me and go, look, I'm Egyptian. Please stop helping the radical Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. That's not who we want. They're mean to us. We just want to be free. Please stop helping the wrong guys. Gary's exactly right. We've underfunded Social Security. We have got to fix that for the sake of future generations. And I hope that we can come together and do that in the near future. And
all right,
thank
Congressman,
you, Greta.
thanks for being on the Washington Journal.